Hello and welcome to another installment of the Oral History of Keizer. This is a project brought to you by the Keizer Points of Interest Committee. Today I have with me Mel Cummings, who is a retired biologist from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, who, after growing up in Klamath Falls, made his way to Keizer after college and has been more or less in this area ever since. So, Mr. Cummings, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about growing up in the Klamath Falls area, and what made you want to come to the Willamette Valley?
Well, growing up in the Klamath Falls area, I was an outdoorsman and I liked to hunt and fish. So when I went to Oregon State, I took up wildlife management. And when I got out, the opportunity to work for the Department of Fish and Wildlife was wide open right after the war. And one of the openings was here in the valley, and I had a friend that lived here that thought I'd ought to live in Salem, so this is where I came.
So this was a fraternity friend of yours
Yes.
from OSU,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So between those two, you were in World War II.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about, you were in the Army?
Yes, I was in the field artillery.
Tell us a little bit about what you did you were in Europe, right?
Correct.
Tell us what you did there.
Well, just what all the other you guys did there. Where the field artillery backed up the infantry, and in all the battles, why we were trying to clear the areas out in front of the infantry so they could keep going. And in the winter time, why things got pretty bogged down with snow and one thing and another, so it was not a very good situation.
So these were pulled by truck, right?
Yes, yes.
What were do you remember some of the battles that your battalion was involved in?
Well, not really, because we were in a separate battalion and we got shifted around a lot wherever we were needed the most. So we weren't too long with any one outfit.
So you were in the military. You graduated college in 1942, right?
Correct.
Got out in 46 and immediately came to this area.
Correct.
You had mentioned kind of a love of the outdoors. Was that that sounds like the primary driver that made you want to be a biologist? What else was the interest there?
Well, I think that was it. Just the love of the outdoors and working with wildlife species.
So tell us about the plot of land that you had purchased near Spong's Landing.
Well, when I first came up here, this friend of mine lived close by. It's on the river, and he said he always went down to this Spong's Landing because it was such a nice spot just to look around in the summertime. And he thought I ought to investigate buying the property and moving there. So I did some research and found out the owner lived over in Central Oregon, and he had no intentions of coming back, so I was able to purchase the land and hired an architect to build us a house, and went on from there.
So were you farming the property?
No, it was only 5 acres, so I had some Christmas trees on it, and then part of the time I leased it out to an adjacent farmer who did truck gardening.
Truck gardening, what's that?
Oh, raising carrots and cabbage and this sort of thing for the market.
I see. So what time of year did you come here?
If I remember correctly, it was in November.
Oh, just in time for the lovely season here in the valley. That area, quite a lot's happened there. One of the things that has happened, you told us when we were talking on the phone, you had mentioned the Columbus Day storms of, I believe it was was it 64?
Right in there, I can't tell you exactly, but that was quite an experience. There were power lines down over the roads, trees in the roads, and the road from Spong's Landing Road down to my house had trees on it. I had to go buy a chainsaw to be able to get into my own home.
Do you remember how long the power was out?
Well, it was out a week or two for most people, but when they went down Spong's Landing Road. We lived off the road, and they went right by our place, and we didn't get hooked up, and they wouldn't come back because for one person because they had whole areas that were out. So I had to wait another month or so before I got my electricity back.
So, that's something that your power's out 5 minutes now. You're on the phone to the electric company. So, how did you and your family manage when the power was out for probably a month?
I was able to get a generator, gas generator, and just get by.
When you say just get by, what were some of the things you were able to power off the generator?
Well, you could run it. You could run the freezer was the main thing, and electricity, and I guess we were able to run the stove too, as long as we didn't cook extensive long meals and one thing and another. But it was sort of like camping out.
So living on the river, were you able to actually see the river from your house?
Yes, yes.
That comes with its own adventures. Why don't you share with us some of the things you saw living there on the river?
It was sort of interesting when they had the big flood, which came a few years later. I looked out one morning and there was a airplane hangar with an airplane inside of it going down the river.
Oh, wow.
And I think they finally were able to anchor it and get a hold of it down at the Wheatland Ferry. And another time in the summertime, while we heard some kids yelling, and we went out there, and there were 2 or 3 young boys, maybe 10, 12 years old, that had gotten on a log on the edge of the river, and the log took off, and they were out in the middle of the river going down and on this log. And fortunately, across the river, we lived right across the river from the little town of Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And there were people over there that had a boat, and they were able to go out and get these kids off the log.
So during the one flood you had mentioned, your area part of town, again, sounds like a theme here, got cut off from most of the rest of the town.
That's correct. The Spong's Landing Road got cut off from the Windsor Island roads, and there was a channel about 16 feet deep that went between us and the Wheatland Road, or the Windsor Island Road.
Mm-hmm.
And from our house on the river, when we listened back to the east, it sounded like the ocean back there. There was so much water going through. It just really spectacular. Again, I asked, how did you and your family manage during that? But I can't imagine you can't go to the store. Well, I had to end up buying a little 12-foot boat and an outboard motor, and leaving my car over at Lincoln and going back and forth across the river to work, getting my car over there.
You mean the office said you had to come anyway?
Yeah. Wasn't any question about it.
So, tell us a little bit about what a biologist, during your time with, you were with ODFW quite a long time. When you started with the agency, what was the job of a biologist?
Well, a district biologist they had fisheries biologists and wildlife biologists, and I was a wildlife biologist, and they were responsible for managing the wildlife resource in a district. There were 20 districts in the state, and one manager for each district biologist.
Mm-hmm.
And you would get the population information, which were the basis for setting the hunting seasons. And then in the summertime here in the Willamette Valley, in those days, in the 50s and 60s, why, strawberries were the main crop that the farmers were raising, and the deer loved strawberries. So we spent a lot of time in the summertime trying to solve the farmers' problems that they were having with deer in their strawberry patches.
How did they solve a problem like the deer in a strawberry patch in the 1950s?
Well, we had a cooperative project where we would supply the fencing materials if they would build a deer-proof fence around the fields, which was a 6-foot-high fence, and it was very effective.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, so how often do people confuse you with the Cummings family that has a street named after them?
Well, I'm no relation, and just happenstance that when we moved where we did, well, one of the Cummings family only lived 2 houses away, and
Hmm.
it caused a lot of confusion for the mailman when he brought our mail. But other than that, why, there was no relationship.
So when you came to this area, you saw, this nice spot you had near Spong's Landing. What was the draw to the community? A young man looking for a place to settle.
Well, I think it was probably the fact that I had a friend, one of my fraternity brothers, that lived within a half a mile of there, and like I said, he came down and in the summertime just thought this was a pretty place to live, and he didn't have any trouble selling me on the idea.
What businesses were here when you got here?
Well, the uh, what few businesses were right along River Road and Shamawa, right? And that was the busy corner right there. The Keizer Grade School set on the northwest corner. I think there may have been a service station on the southwest corner, and Keizer Food Lockers and Meat Market was just a couple of doors down from that on the west side of River Road.
Hmm.
And there was a shoe store and some little businesses there, but not over 10 or 15 altogether.
So what made you? Or I want to go back actually to the flood when you were cut off from kind of the rest of town. You said that your wife had her mother. Had her mother living with her?
No, my mother had come up
Okay.
to spend the Christmas holidays with us, and she was not in too good a health, and my wife saw the river starting to rise, and we had never been cut off from town, but she was concerned about it. So she decided she would take my mother up to visit her mother and stay with her in Portland, which she did. And by the time she got back, it was after dark, and the water was already starting to come across the road. And the first low spot in the road she hit was on Windsor Island Road, and her lights shone right over the top of it, so she was in it before she knew what happened.
Hmm.
And she got through that and was able to get down the road to this friend's house, the one who showed me the spot to buy. And she stayed overnight there, and he was able to bring her home in a couple of days in a boat.
Do you remember how it's hard now to imagine how extensive that was. What areas of town were hit hard by that flood?
Well, all along the river, along where Mandarin Gardens is now, and then between Windsor Island Road and River Road, there were low spots there where the houses actually just disappeared, were wiped completely away. And some of the earlier floods, I was told that people were in their boats rowing right up to the Keizer Grade School right on the corner there.
Oh wow! So you had lived on the river. You had mentioned earlier you were an outdoorsman from the very beginning, but you couldn't fish on the river.
Well, we tried to fish on the river, but in those days there was lots of pollution from paper mills and one thing and another, and the sugars in these waste solutions created a lot of algae, slimy algae, and you get out on the river and put a line in the water, in about 30 seconds it was so gooed up with slime and one thing and another that you couldn't fish, so you just gave up.
So where did you like to go fish?
In the ocean.
Hey, when did you actually move off Spong's Landing?
Well, in about 1973, my wife decided that we should move to higher ground. And there was some land out east of town on the Little Pudding River that we moved to, and we stayed there until 2002, and then my wife wanted to come back to Keizer. We had a little farm out east of town, got to where in my 80s it was a little more than I could take care of.
Hmm.
So she wanted to come back to Keizer, but she didn't want to be down on the floodplain. So we moved up on the first level, which was up on the Wheatland Road as you go north.
So what did you farm when you were living out near the Little Pudding?
Well, I had cattle and Christmas trees.
Both in demand? Or were they? You tell me.
Yes, yes, yes. Christmas trees were in good demand in those days.
So it was, what made you and your wife want to come back here for retirement? After you had mentioned the farm, what was the draw? You could have gone anywhere in the world, so what was the draw to Keizer?
Oh, we just liked the area, and our friends were here, and when you've lived here most of your adult life, why move?
Hmm. Who were some of the families and friends that you spent time with, either today or when you were a young family making it on the river?
Well, we spent a lot of our time with the Blakes, who showed us the property we bought, and they are now the owners of the log house,
Gardens.
log house gardens, and he was my fraternity brother in college. That's how I got
I
acquainted with
see.
him. And so then, and my son grew up and went through grade school and high school. He was in the first class that went from the freshman through their senior year at the McNary High School.
Hmm.
So he had friends, and we got acquainted with their parents. And so we knew various people in the community.
So how did getting a high school to call kind of, my understanding is that the Keizer School played a big role in the community. So how did adding a high school specifically for Keizer, how did that affect the community as far as you can tell? Today you can't drive, you don't see anything but McNary shirts, but this had to be a new exciting thing at the time.
Yes, I guess it was. At that time, I may have been working statewide, so I wasn't really spending too much time in the community here.
Hmm.
And but yes, it was a big thing not to have to get onto the bus and go to North Salem High School. I know that.
I was going to say, what'd your son think of that?
He was all for it. Yeah.
Were you involved with civic groups here in town, or did work keep you busy?
Work kept me busy, and the main clubs that were interested in having me join them were wildlife clubs. And when I was working all over the state, I've sort of felt that if I joined one, they'd want me to join every place. So I just would rather remain guest and go when I was invited.
I see. So you had mentioned earlier, what's it been like to watch? You mentioned the few businesses that were there. What's it been like to see Keizer grow so dramatically over the years? What was the difference between, you leave in '73 and come back? You said in 2000, in the early 2000s.
Yes,
What was that like? That had to be different.
it was entirely. There was no exit off the freeway when we left, and well, the whole area just developed just unbelievably.
Hmm.
How much it had developed, and the new roads through the areas, and but it's that way all over the valley floor here now.
What were some of the things that you and your family did for fun in the when you were living on in the Spong's Landing area?
Pick strawberries.
Well, I've heard that's a blast.
Well, we really felt bad when all these kids were learning how to work and spending money and money to buy their clothes for school and one thing and another, and then they changed the federal and state laws so they couldn't work in the fields, and I still shake my head about that going on.
Tell me a little bit more about that. Why you felt that that was a poor change? You're not the first person I've heard say that.
Well, I worked all my life as a kid. I've made money, bought my own clothes from having paper routes and mowing people's lawns and one thing and another. And I never had time to get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids that worked in the strawberry fields were the same way. And it was just a good life learning experience for them.
So what do you think was the single biggest change in either in your time here or when you came back that's had the biggest effect on Keizer as a community?
Boy, just the rapid growth. A lot of the farmland. In fact, when we built our new house on Wheatland Road and had the Blakes come out and see it, well, the first thing they said, "Oh, I know this spot. I picked filberts here."
So any other? It's about time to wrap it up. Are there any thoughts you want to leave us with?
Well, I still think Keizer's a great community, and I had a very, very rewarding experience last night, Halloween. I was truly amazed of all the children that came at my house. There was not one that didn't say thank you when I gave them something at the door. I was going to write a letter to the editor of that because it really astounded me.
Now that is impressive. I want to thank you for watching. Again, this is part of the Oral History Project, which is a project, if you will, of the Keizer Oral History or Points of Interest Committee. I want to thank you all for watching. Thank Mr. Cummings for coming out, and have a wonderful day.